Hello darlings, it's Melissa, your Learning Technologies trainer. This video is a part of a series on Problem of the Day, a high-impact instructional strategy to help grow your students as problem solvers. If you're joining us here from YouTube, scroll down to the description box to see the other videos in the series. And while you're here, go ahead and press like, subscribe, and hit that bell so that you can be notified of all of our upcoming content. And if you're joining us audio only and PD to go, then check the listings for the other audio in this series. All right, let's get to learning. Hello darlings, it's Melissa, Learning Technologies trainer, here to show you how to use Google Slides to turn any problem into a POD cycle. This video is a part of a series all about PODs, so check into the description box to see the other videos in this series. Well, that's for our YouTube friends who have, of course, liked, subscribed, and clicked that bell so that you're notified of our upcoming content. But if you're joining us audio only and PD to go, then check your listings for the other audio in this series. Speaking of other videos in this series, make sure you check out how to use Peardeck to make these Google Slides interactive. Now you're going to hear me say POD and POD cycle a lot in this video. So let's make sure that we're on the same page and we have a common language about what it is I'm even talking about. POD stands for Problem of the Day, and this is an instructional practice where teachers model the best practices for problem solving. In this practice, the focus is not getting to the right answer. It's growing as a problem solver. So in order to accomplish that, we're going to take that problem and we're going to put it in what's called a POD cycle, which is at least 2 days of the students looking at a problem in order to grow in their steps and process of being a problem solver. On the first day of a POD cycle, the students are looking at the context of a problem as well as how to model it without even trying to solve it at all. And then in the second day, the students are actually solving the problems and talking to their learning partners about how to use their models in which to arrive at a solution. Now, before we talk about turning any problem into a POD cycle, let's pause and talk about where we can find some resources. Now, you know I'm all about saving time and working smarter and not harder. So if you are a teacher within Cincinnati Public Schools, then we already have a bank of problem of the days available for you. Now, unfortunately, if you're not a CPS teacher, you may not be able to access those resources, but there are also other sites that I highly recommend to find really good problems in order to make into a POD cycle. Now, my top 3 are the ODE practice test. That's because I work in the state of Ohio, but if you work in another state, then check your Department of Education to see where sample, practice, or released test problems would be. They are a great resource. My second favorite is within your curriculum. Check your textbooks, check your online resources. Find any great problem that you'd like to give to your students, and you can make that into a POD cycle. And my third favorite is to just Google it. You can Google practice error problems. You can Google rich problems. You can Google your grade level mathematics problems, word problems, and just find some examples that you really like and would like to give to your students. You can take any rich problem and turn it into a POD cycle in order to concentrate on the best practices for being a great problem solver. You got to start with designing your template. This is the template that our bank of POD resources for Cincinnati public school teachers is already designed with. So I'm going to use that today because I share a lot of resources with our CPS teachers. So if they already have those structured in that way, I'm going to keep that same template. But you choose a template that works for you in your classroom. You just want to make sure that it has at least 4 slides. One that shows the learning target. You need a part A and a B, and then you need a 4th slide that's going to show your final answer. Next, you're going to choose your problem. I highly suggest that you make sure you use some data such as an adaptive technology or a pretest or a diagnostic test to choose the standards that you want your students to review. Because problem of the days want to concentrate on the process of being a good problem solver, it's not really suggested that you use this strategy to introduce a new concept, but rather to review a concept that students have already been taught. That way, they're able to go through the steps, accessing their prior knowledge and becoming a better problem solver. This particular problem that I've chosen is a released item from the Ohio Department of Education's AIR test. I like to use problem of the days not only to help students to become better problem solvers, but also to get them to see the structure and vocabulary that they're going to see on end of course assessments. Now that I've got my problem chosen, I'm ready for step one. Step one, or part A, is to prompt students to think about the problem's context as well as know how the problem can be modeled. Consider deleting or covering up the intended questions or key numbers to help students concentrate on context. This is going to be your day one, part A of your cycle. It is really important not to skip this step. And as teachers, sometimes we just want to see if students can get to the correct answer. But remember, the purpose of a problem of the day cycle is to concentrate on how to be a better problem solver. It is not to concentrate on how to get to the correct answer. So in order for us to help our students to be better problem solvers, we have to get them to pause, slow down, and look at the context of the problem. I always tell my students that we live in a word problem. You go to the grocery store and you're in a word problem. You drive, you're in a word problem. You're a student going on a field trip and you're in a word problem. So as problem solvers, we have to pause and see what's going on in the situation. That really helps our students to understand what prior knowledge they should access in order to get to that answer. It's also important at this step that you give the students an opportunity to model the mathematics. So here's my template all ready for my POD cycle, and I'm going to change just a couple things that I do in my classroom to make this more accessible for my students. My very first slide is always the learning target. I think it's really important for students to know at the end of this exercise, this is what you should have learned. But I wanted to make it a little bit more friendly to them. So I'm going to change this to an I can statement. All right, part A, here we go. Remember, at this point in the POD cycle, we want to give students an opportunity to reflect on the context of the problem and also to see how the problem can be modeled. Let's remind ourselves of what problem we're turning into a POD cycle. I can see from this problem that students are going to have to divide a multi-digit number. I want to remind them how to do that. For part A, you have options. Let me show you a few. One option is to ask the students to draw a model using a simpler problem. Because 180 divided by 15 is an anchor of 5 and 10, it's a little bit friendlier for students to think about than the numbers that are involved in the problem. By using this strategy for part A, in the discussion, you can really start to see the models that students would be using that you can use to help them for part B. Here's option 2. You can take the problem that you intend for them to solve, but cover up the numbers. That way students don't do the infamous pick two numbers and add, which they do all of the time. Students can read this, understand that we have a whole that is being separated into groups, and understand that this is a situation where they would use division without being distracted by the numbers themselves. Step 2 of transforming any problem into your POD cycle is part B, or day 2, where you actually prompt the students to answer your intended question. Now notice on my slide that I did give them a little bit of the direction to use their model from day 1 or one that was learned from a partner. The benefit of really separating these problems into a part A and B, or a day 1 and 2, is to have that rich discussion around those models. So when my students come in to do part B, They not only know how they modeled the problem in part A, but they also know how their learning partners modeled that same problem. So they can choose to use their model if that works best for them, or they can choose to use the model of a partner if they felt that that was a better model for them to solve that problem. Now, with that being said, I highly encourage you as a teacher to make sure that those models that students have generated are posted so that the students can review. You can post those on your learning management system. You can use Peardeck and screenshot the students' models. You can use anchor charts that they're physically in hard copies around the room. Completely up to you. You can also have the students make sure that they write their models down in a math notebook so that way they can see and share once they get to part B. The last step in our POD cycle is the answer reveal, in which we make sure that everyone in the learning community has arrived at the same solution. And I personally like to train my students to make sure that their final solution is written in a complete sentence. It's that last time that they can ask their brain, does my answer make sense? And if they didn't know where that 21 was coming from, then it makes them look back at the problem to make sure that they've went through the process correctly and that their problem solving steps make sense. Now you could choose to do this very last answer portion on the same day. Once the students use their models to solve their problems, then you can reveal if everyone was correct or incorrect. Or you can choose to extend your POC cycle into a third day. The benefits of doing that is first, you can look at your students' responses from day 2 to truly understand where misconceptions are made. That way you can take screenshots or ask students to share their misconceptions so that everyone in the learning community learns from each other's mistakes. You also could use video tools to have a more interactive and engaging reveal of your answer. If you're interested in that, check the description box because we have a video in this series on how to use Screencastify in your answer reveal. That's it. It's that easy. I have taken my released problem from state testing and changed it into a POD cycle where my students not only understand how to solve that particular problem, but they're able to be better problem solvers and also see some of the verbiage that they would see on state testing. As a reminder, this video is part of a series on how to use this POD practice to help your students to be more effective problem solvers. So check out the description box of this video to see some of the other videos in the series. Until we learn together again, folks, always keep growing.